Right, boys and girls, in this video we're going to be looking at what effects your FOV and aspect ratio have in P-side. Now I've had to redo this video about 3 times and I'm already grumpy, so cue the intro. Oh wait, I don't have an intro. I can probably wang something together. So all this started after I read one of those many Reddit posts that said having a high FOV reduces your recoil. All the pros have really high FOV and their recoil is tiny, their guns don't kick at all, and they're basically cheating by manipulating the settings, you know? Now, everyone responded naturally by saying no way, FOV only changes the perceived recoil, not the actual in-game functions that are happening. The pros do make it look easy, but that's because they can control their recoil really well. And I totally agreed with them. You know, I said it must be a perspective thing, right? There's no way that Planetside's crazy spaghetti code could actually do something this broken, right? And spoilers, it is fine. It is just perspective, but here's the tests and here's the proof. So, I tried to control everything I could for the test. So as you could see, I stood on the same point, I'm using the same gun, which is the Gauss saw, I'm using a 1x scope on all of them, and I'm aiming at the same point on the target, which is the head. I then left click and I hold it all the way through the mag, so no bursting, and there is zero compensation. I'm not moving my mouse, I'm just letting the guns kick up naturally until they reach their maximum point. And then, just to be safe, I did it a second time, I did all the same stuff in exactly the same position, blah blah blah, just to make sure that none of these were a one-off. Okay, so now we're going to do it at 115 FOV. So I started at 95, now we've gone on to 115, exactly the same parameters, and then I'm going to do it a second time as well. So I'm going to speed these up because I don't think you need to see it, but hopefully you understand and agree that I'm doing it properly. And then finally, exactly the same, but at 70 FOV. And double tests as well. Feel free to watch the whole thing. I am going to speed it up though. Okay, so here are the final positions. Now we're going to start with 70 FOV, but I think that you can see that there is a bar right at the bottom of the scope, and the distance from that bar to where my actual reticule is, you know, the green thing, you can see that that difference is basically exactly the same. You can also use the awnings on the side, and it's right in the middle of the 2 struts that are holding those awnings in. So I really think that at FOV, the recoil hasn't changed whatsoever. But obviously, let's move on to 90 and 150. Oh look, it's exactly the same. Yeah, there you go. This comparison is really telling. I think it's completely identical how the recoil works, depending on your FOV. So it does actually work like it's supposed to. FOV does not affect your in-game recoil, which is quite a relief. You can pick whatever FOV you like, and you're not at an advantage or a disadvantage when it comes to recoil. If the perception of your recoil makes a difference, then that's something to play with, but it doesn't actually affect things in-game. You can have whatever you want. The pros, they're just pro, they're actually good at playing the game. Oh, that came out really mean. But they are good at playing the game, and they are able to compensate for the recoil, and that's what you're seeing. It doesn't actually affect anything in game. Good. So that's all done. Great, we don't need to worry about that anymore. However, I thought I'd test something else while I'm here. There is a widescreen mode setting that you can either check or uncheck, and I wanted to kind of find out what this did and if it is actually beneficial at any point to have it enabled or disabled. So you will have noticed that all the tests have been tested for the FOV, they've been tested at different aspect ratios, but they've also been tested with the widescreen mode applied or not applied. Now it didn't really make much difference, but you might have seen right at the end when we got to those high FOVs that there were some differences between widescreen on, widescreen off. So let's dive deeper into that. So at 70 FOV, nothing seems to be different. Hipfire FOV doesn't look any different with widescreen on or off, and aim down sights FOV doesn't look any different with it on or off. But now look at this, we get to 95, on the 4:3 aspect ratio, nothing is different. Hipfire is still the same, and aim down sights is still the same. However, look at the 16:9. Hipfire is actually wider. You can see there are 2 pillars on the left and right with those lights on, they are not visible with wide mode off. So immediately we've got a change there. So wide mode seems to be almost capping the FOV. So even if you're putting 95 FOV, it's actually capping you at less than that. That's thing number one. Thing number two, look what happens when you aim down sights. Now, on widescreen mode on, you get the normal effect of having the 1x scope amplify your zoom. Because 1x isn't actually 1x in Planetside, it's 1.3 times. So you do actually zoom in a little bit. However, wide mode off, whoa, the FOV is exactly the same, the zoom is gone. Who knows why the heck that happens, but it does. And now at 115 we can see pretty much all of these effects amplified. So now it's starting to affect things on the 4:3 ratio. Can you see those pillars that we were talking about with the lights on is now visible in 4:3 with wide mode on, but they are not visible with wide mode off. Also in 4:3, now when you aim down sights with wide mode off, you also get that weird no zooming effect. So it's like your scope isn't really doing anything. It's not doing its normal 1.35 times, it's just doing literally 1 times. And now if we look at 16:9, you've got massive crazy FOV where you're gonna start seeing behind you. But with wide mode off, you still get the same thing. It hasn't changed. Even though we've increased that FOV, you're still getting exactly the same effects as if you had FOV at 95. So what does this actually mean? That's a very good question. Widescreen mode being on seems to allow the game to perform normally. You increase your FOV, it actually increases. And your aim down sight actually increases and it all works fine. When you uncheck it, there's a weird cap that happens. And over a certain point, even if you rank up that FOV number, it's never going to increase in FOV. And then your aim down sights starts going weird because your 1x's are now pure 1x's. They're not 1.3 times like they should be. You don't get any zoom when you scope in. It's just a 1x scope. Now, is this useful? Maybe? It's personal opinion, isn't it? If you want your 1x scopes to be exactly the same as your hipfire, then you can now do that, can't you? There's no zooming, there's no weird perspective thing. It's exactly the same. And that can be kind of nice, to have like a direct flow from hipfire into aiming down sights when you really need to beam those headshots. You do have to deal with a slightly wider FOV, maybe than you're used to, but remember it does put that cap on, so it's kind of normal. Oh, one thing I haven't mentioned yet is I said that it makes no difference whether you increase your FOV. That is true, but what it actually does is it increases the size of your gun model. You can test this out yourself using the commands that I'm going to show later, but basically your model gets closer and closer to the screen, but it doesn't actually affect anything else. So that's a bit weird. So I don't know if you just want your pistol to look absolutely huge, but you can do that. And so I quickly went over when it actually happens, and I can just tell you, at 16:9, if you set your FOV to 95 and you uncheck widescreen mode, then you'll get the pure 1x scope or whatever, and you'll start seeing the effects. If you're in 4:3 aspect ratio, that number is 111. So now you're saying to me, Sam, come on, this video is so long, surely we are done, but no, we are not. I actually noticed something that I've never heard anyone else talk about. I'm sure I'm not the first person, but just I hadn't come across it. Now, when we were changing aspect ratio, and I had the two screens side by side, I realized that the hipfire reticle is actually different for both of them. So then, again, spaghetti code, is this actually going to affect your hipfire, or is it just a perceived effect? Let's have a look. So here's the test I did. I again stood at exactly the same distance away. There's actually a little yellow marker on the floor, and I aimed at the same point on the target, and what I did is I'm tap firing this time, so I'm clicking once, I'm letting the recoil completely reset until it gets back to the head, and then I'm tapping again. And I did this for the entire mag of the Gore Saw. Okay, so here's what we had. I obviously bumped the graphics up to ultra so that I can actually see where the shots landed. But looking at the target, I've got the circle is the general area where the bullets actually landed, and then the lines are just a reference so I can see where they actually go in the target. Because obviously the targets look completely different because it's different aspect ratios. But using the circles, I think we can say the bullets haven't particularly got less or more spread, so they are not less or more accurate. And using the lines that is on the extremities of the circle, you can see that they basically come to exactly the same points on the target, you know, if you trace the lines up or down, etc. So what do I think we can conclude from this? Now, the reticule is clearly different, right? If you look on the left, the reticule is much tighter. Even vertically it's tighter, which I don't totally understand. It's vertically tighter and horizontally tighter. But on the right hand side, which is 4.3, it's way wider. But the actual spread of the hipfire in-game is exactly the same. So is this actually useful? Maybe, yeah, I think it is. So I used to play on 16.9, and whenever I would hipfire somebody, even though I made sure that their model fitted perfectly within my hipfire reticule, I used to find that the bullets would just go everywhere, the spread was way too much, and I would just never hit anything. And I used to find that incredibly frustrating. Now, I just happened, separately, to move to 4.3 aspect ratio, and all of a sudden, I found that my hipfire was kind of fine. I assumed I'd just got better. I assumed I just improved as a player. But what we can look at here is maybe 4.3 was tricking me, yeah? 4.3 looks way worse. The reticule looks and suggests that your hipfire is going to be much worse. So if I got close enough to fill the reticule with the target, my bullets will have basically been laser beams, because I was actually way closer to the target, because I thought I needed to be closer because of the reticule. So the fact of the matter is, the reticule is wrong, really, on 4.3, and it is more correct on 16.9. So if you want accurate information and you want to understand everything so you can make the best judgment, you should in theory go for 16.9. But I found that I would miss when I did that. By skewing it, by changing it to 4.3, and basically it misleading me and tricking me into getting closer, suddenly all my hipfire was great, you know, I was hitting everything because I was basically right in their face. So it doesn't really affect gameplay. It will affect your decisions because it affects your perception of the matter. But the reality is, if you're doing great on 16.9, leave it. You're doing great already, you don't need any help. But if you are struggling and you think that hipfire is way too inaccurate, maybe try 4.3. You might be surprised because you will play the same way, but all of a sudden your bullets are more accurate. It's actually because you're closer. But you don't know that. Oh, okay, so we're done. I'm done. I haven't got any more tests to do. If you think I've missed anything, do let me know, because I'll probably go and test it. But what have we concluded? We've concluded that FOV does not affect your in-game recoil. It does affect what you see and how you perceive it, so you can use that to your advantage if you want. If you're like, man, my recoil is crazy and it stresses me out, then increase your FOV. Your recoil will seem smaller, but it isn't in reality, and that might help you compensate for it. So that's something you can look into. You can also look into the crazy widescreen thing where you can actually get a real 1x scope instead of Planetside's innate 1.35x scope. And to do that, you've got to reach the threshold FOV, which for 16.9 is 95, and which for 4.3 is 111. Then just untick widescreen mode and you can have that weird effect. So if that's something you're interested in, give it a try. Then when it also comes to hipfire, having aspect ratio as 4.3 or as 16.9 does make a difference. So just pick what you think. If you have problems with hipfire, maybe try 4.3. If you don't bother. You're absolutely fine. Okay, boy, that was so long, and this actually took me hours and hours to make. I should have been using my time better, but hopefully this answers some questions, hopefully it removes some doubts, and hopefully it actually gives you some ways that you can personalize Planetside to fit you better and to fit maybe your downfalls better, because that's actually what I've done. I ended up doing these all by accident and I didn't know why they were helping, but then I did all these tests and all of a sudden, oh look, there's actually a reason for this. So if you think anything else I should test, just let me know. I'd be pretty interested to have a go. And yeah, and that's it. This video is way too long. I'm out of here.